left off talking about Firebase. Last class we got a little intro to it, set up our application, and used the off portion of Firebase, which allows us to register and log in and sign out users to our application. So we've got that up and going, and now the next step is where it gets really fun, and that's using the Firebase database. And that's how we can store and communicate data through our application. So we're going to look at that. The first thing we're going to do, though, is we are going to look at a little bit more of the lab that we were doing over the weekend. I just wanted to point out a few more things. I sent out the full solution, I think Tuesday morning is when I actually sent it out. And so hopefully you got a chance to look at that. But I did want to call out a few things and do a few short exercises to just really drive home a few portions of that lab. So I guess the first thing we'll go ahead and do is get the starter code for today's class, just because we need it. And I'm going to go ahead and in the terminal, I'm going to cd to go to my home directory, then cd into documents. Hopefully this almost feels second nature at this point. And once I'm in documents, I'm going to cd into the class repository. And now that I'm in there, I'm going to get pull to get all of the juicy updates. Quite a few of them. Then I'm going to cd ... to go up one directory. After I get pull, I'm going to cd ... go up one directory. Once again, there's always instructions to do this in the class GitHub repository, so if you're falling behind, take a look at those. Now that I've cd ... I'm back in documents. I'm going to make a new directory inside of my named. Oh, thank you. That would have been bad. Got a make dir Jacobs JS repo, and I'm going to make, I think today's class 15. Yes, today's class 15. I'm going to make a class 15 folder in there. Okay, I've got that. It's time to copy the files. I'm going to cp-r, copy recursively, the files from JS-DC to 15 Firebase and intro to starter code. Move that final slash, and I'm going to put that into my name directory, Jacobs JS repo class 15. So I'm just copying that starter code folder into Jacobs JS repo. Finally, I'm going to cd right back into there, Jacobs JS repo class 15 starter code. Once I'm inside of the starter code directory, I'm going to subl dot, and that will open up Sublime. So all we just did there was go into the class repository, git repository, pull down the updates, and then copy the starter code into a new directory so that we can work on it without affecting the original repository. Okay. All right, so now we've got that open. Before we actually look at this, though, I want to look at the code from the solution, just briefly. Okay, so I sent out this hint number 4, which had a completed version of the lab. This is my implementation. Yours might have been, it probably will have been slightly different if you got this far, and that's totally okay. There's lots of different ways to do the same thing as we're seeing. As these get more complicated, there's infinite different ways to put these apps together. My way is just one. I think it's a decent one, but there's probably others that are just as good. So we talked about all of this last time, setting up the event listeners. We talked about, how the model here, how we constructed this, how we put some dummy data in there at first, and then we removed it once our templates worked. We also talked about, why did we do this compile templates here as a separate step rather than doing it within the render as we did when we first learned about templates. And the reason is we can compile these templates once at the beginning of our application rather than doing it every time we re-render, every time we call this render login function. So this will save us, just a little bit, but it'll save us some computing time, right? Because it takes computer power to compile those templates. We also talked a little bit about, this login here and this AJAX request that we made, but we didn't look much at, say, this toggle interest or this toggle bookmark that weren't there at the time. So one thing specifically I wanted to point out about these toggle functions is they do a couple things, right? So they do this first thing where they get some information about the thing that was clicked on. Okay, so that's really the first thing they're doing is grabbing some information from the HTML about what individual HTML element was clicked on. Okay, that's important, and so we'll look at that in a second. And then the next thing it does is, conditionally makes one of two AJAX requests. So in this case, it's seeing, does it have this primary class, this label primary, which indicates that it is a user interest. And if it is, then we're going to delete that interest. Because the user is indicating they want to turn that interest off. If it doesn't have that class, if it doesn't have label primary, then we want to add it to their interests, and thus we're going to make an AJAX post request. It just so happens that the URL for these two requests is the same. So we can compute the URL up here before the conditional. Okay. Now, notice what we do in this callback is we load categories and articles again. Now notice I'm doing it both places. Why don't I take this load categories and articles and move it down here and just do it this way? Why don't I do that? Yeah, because why? Right, exactly. Because these two AJAX requests are asynchronous, which means if I put load categories here and load articles here, line 88 would run before this finished, right? Before the post request has completed, or before the delete request has completed, I would try to load the categories. Now that's problematic because what I'm doing here is updating the categories, right? Essentially, what I'm doing here is updating the interest, which has cascading effects onto the categories. And thus, if I try to load them before that update I completed, it's not going to behave the way I expect it to. So in order to ensure that loading those things doesn't happen until after the delete or the post completes, I have to put them in the callback function. Okay? So anytime where we need to mandate that something happen in a certain order, when we're looking at asynchronous tasks like AJAX requests, anytime we need to mandate that something come after an AJAX request completes, we must use the callback function. There's no other way, or very hard to determine whether or not something is completed if we're not doing it inside of a callback function. Okay? Questions about this? We're going to do a short little exercise involving this concept. But any questions before we do? Yeah.
It's kind of a tangent, but is there a reason that there's not a delete function?
There probably is. My best guess is that in the early days of browsers, they weren't able to perform delete HTTP requests or put HTTP requests. The only two that they could do was get and post until AJAX was introduced much later. So my guess is because those two are more common in the web, that jQuery happened to make function shorthands for it. But there's no reason why they shouldn't have a .delete and a at this point. They don't. So, more questions? Okay, so let's now look at that starter code. There's a review.js file in here, and I'm actually going to pull up, like I did last time, the nice looking version of this. Okay, so this first exercise here, we have, again, some fake API documentation. Here it's defining two endpoints, a get current game endpoint and a put game ID in game endpoint. Okay? And what the question is asking you to do is first make an AJAX request that will end the game, and then issue a GET request to reload the current game. Okay, so you want to do these two requests in a sequence, right? We want to do this put first, and then once that's complete, we want to do a GET request. Okay, so write two AJAX requests that happen one after the other. Okay, that's what we're asking you to do here. So go ahead and try to do that. And in the JavaScript file, there's like this big long comment which has the same text that we just saw, and you can just do it right here on line 27. And I'll leave this up because it looks so nicer. All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start working through this a little bit. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is sort of a naive approach. And then I'll show you, why that doesn't work and how we could do it. So here's my naive approach, right? If I want two things to happen one after the other, typically when we're writing JavaScript, I do the, for the first request we're going to do is in the game, which we know is a put that URL. So I'd have to use .ajax for a put request. So I would say .put, and I would give it .ajax, and I give it this object. And in that object, I'd say, URL / game / I'm just going to say 1, 2, 3. We're putting dummy data in there, and then I'd say end game. Okay. And I'm going to say type is put. This is a put request. And I could maybe leave it that way. Right? And then down here on the next line, I might put .get, because we have this shorthand for GET requests. And then I would say, make a GET request to this URL / current game. And then here I'd probably have a callback function that gets that data response and probably is going to update my model or something. Okay, well, I kind of gave away the kicker here. This won't work, right? So why won't this work? I really want to drive this point home. Why won't this code work? Yeah?
Is the top may not have run before it tries to update the model, so we have the data just put.
Exactly right. On line 27, I'm going to run this function which starts or initiates an AJAX request. The next thing that will happen is line 31 will run, and that will start or initiate a GET AJAX request. Then, sometime later, this one will complete. Or perhaps this one will complete first. We have no way of guaranteeing which one actually finishes first if we write it this way. The only way we can guarantee the order that these requests happen is by using callback functions, right? And so we can do that. We can add a callback function. How do we add a callback function to a .ajax request? What key do I need to use here? Yeah, correct, success, which means function to run when this request completes successfully. And so we would say function, usually we put like data here. And then inside of this function, that is where we can run our GET request. Oh no. There we go. So inside of that function, that is where we now are guaranteed that the previous AJAX request is complete. And at this point, we can now safely update our model. Go and do that GET request and update that model. Now, what you'll notice, first of all, a couple things. One thing, this and this have the same name, these two parameters. Not great. We should probably choose a different name for one or the other. But actually, in the case of this AJAX request, we're not actually using that data at all that comes back in this case. So we can just actually get rid of it in that function. So now that data name is no longer ambiguous. If we reuse it twice, it becomes a bit ambiguous. Yeah.
So what does return?
Yeah.
So it returns value that you're putting.
No, it will return whatever the server responds with, which could be the right thing to do. The thing that the server should do is return the thing you updated. But that's not guaranteed. It all depends on how the server is implemented. It's up to the backend developer how that endpoint behaves. So we're not really guaranteed anything. We have to look at the API docs and see what comes back. In this case, we know that the response to the put will look like this. But that's only because it's documented. We have no way of knowing that ahead of time. Okay, any more questions about this? Yeah.
Maybe this is more of a stylistic question, but when should we store parameters and variables? Because I've seen that in some places. I tend to do it just because it keeps
like this, like var.
Yeah, or like above the request, if you have, if you store the URL. And
Oh, yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying. So like if above here, if I had like var URL, and then equals game, and then maybe if this is a real application, I have like game ID, right? Plus end game, something like that.
Yeah.
When to do this versus when to just put it right here. To be honest with you, that's a very subjective question. People will answer differently. Generally, my rule of thumb is if you're doing like too many things on one line, start breaking it out into intermediate variables, right? In that case, we're just doing a little bit of concatenation and putting it right there. there's really no harm in doing it either way. The other reason why you might do it as a variable, like, for instance, like I did in this example, right? Here I store it as a URL variable up here and then use it this way. Well, the reason I chose to do it this way is because I actually use that twice, right? So rather than doing this whole long string concatenation twice in my code, I can just do it once in a variable and use it in both places. So, anytime you're going to use, something more than once, good idea to do it once and store it in a variable. That's a pretty good always time. The other case where you're doing it, once, a little bit up to your discretion. Any more questions about that? Okay, so I want to point out a couple more things, small things-ish. So another thing that we noticed about this code, at the top of each of these event listeners, the toggle interest and the toggle bookmark, the first thing we're doing is we're kind of taking what was clicked on and trying to extract some information from that and kind of map it back to our model. I think that's really clear here. So here, right, we're taking this, which is the article that was clicked on, and we're getting its index in the HTML. Okay, so the articles are all children of a div, or I think it might be a section. They're all children of a section element, and we're trying to figure out which article is it in this list of articles. What's its index? Because we can then take that index to go back to our model and get the model object for that article. Okay, so we're trying to go from, our view is taking this JavaScript data and turning it into HTML. Here, we're trying to go the other direction, right? We're trying to take this HTML and somehow get back to our model. Okay? And the reason in this case that we need to do that is because we need the article's ID, and we need to know whether or not it's bookmarked. Right? And those things are stored in the model. Okay, so this is one way that we could do it. But there's another way, and I'll go ahead and show you another way because we'll use it again tonight and a couple times. So if we look at our HTML, we have, look at our article template. Here we are rendering all the parts of our article, and we put a bunch of the properties of that article into the template, right? So we put its description here, we put its title here, its category here. One thing that we don't put anywhere is its ID, right? Because its ID isn't valuable to the user. The user doesn't care what its ID is. They don't want to see its ID. It's just a random string. It doesn't really look like anything to a user. However, that is the thing that we need in order to make this AJAX request. So rather than relying on its index to find out, where is it in the model and then go back to the model to get that ID, we could just put the ID into the template directly. Okay? And this is an approach that you'll see quite frequently. So we want to put it somewhere in this template, but we don't want to put it anywhere where the user can see it, right? Because the user, again, is not interested in this. And so the way that we can do this is by using what we call a custom attribute, okay, a custom HTML attribute. And somebody, if you could remind me, what is an HTML attribute? Just generally speaking. Yeah.
Style.
Exactly. Each one of these names equals values is an attribute, right? So here, this is the class attribute. This is the source attribute. This is the target attribute, the href attribute. Each of these pairs of names equals value is an attribute. So we can actually make up our own and add them to this HTML. And when we do that, we traditionally, this is the convention, we conventionally prefix them with data dash. Okay? So here in this article, if I wanted to put the ID somewhere, in this HTML somewhere where the user can't see it, well, I could just make a data-id attribute, and in that attribute, I could store the article's ID. Okay, so the user is not going to be able to see that. I mean, if they open their Elements, console and look at the HTML, they'll see it. But we don't really care about that. They won't see it on the page. Yet it's still there, and it's easy for us to access. Okay, so now if we wanted to get the ID, rather than going back to the model, somehow mapping this element in the HTML back to the model in order to find its ID, we could do that by just finding the value of this data ID attribute, right? And we can do that easily in jQuery. So let's pop back over to app.js. So just for a second, just looking at this line 94, if we don't have this article from the model anymore, well, we can use jQuery this, get the article that was clicked on. Okay? So this, remember, is the thing that was clicked on, in this case, the article that was clicked on. And we can use jQuery's .adder function, attr, get attribute. And we can get the value of the attribute with the name data ID. Okay. Now we know, we're using it for bookmarks here, but we can get that. We know that there's an element in there in the HTML only if it's bookmarked, so we could get that as well. But if all we need was the ID, we no longer need to go back to the model at all. We could just use this ID directly to make this request. Okay. So it saves us a step of having to map that back to the ID. And it just so happens, conveniently for us, that the index in the HTML happens to align with the index in the model, but that may not always be the case. What if there's like a filtering mechanism or a sorting mechanism in our list of articles? Well, all of a sudden the index in the HTML may differ from the index in the model. And so we might need this method of storing that ID and having a way to get to the ID without relying on where it lives in the HTML. Okay, so turn back to the starter code, and we will do just two quick things to drive that point home. We have here in this exercise a model with some dummy data in it, and we have a template that's used for rendering this model. So go ahead and add something to this template so that we can extract that ID without having to go back to the model. Okay. So use that same method that we just used in order to add something to this template so that we can get back to that ID without relying on its index. Okay. All right, so this is hopefully fairly simple. We notice that each of these scores objects has an ID key. Okay. And so inside of this, oh man, this is formatted weird. Sorry about that. Inside of this, on each of these LIs, we can just add a data-ID attribute. And in that attribute, we can store ID. Okay. So then, if we needed, if this thing were clicked, we could use that data.id attribute in order to figure out what is the ID of this score, and then potentially we could use that ID to make some sort of AJAX request. Questions so far? Yes.
Do you always have to have quotes around the object?
I mean, you would only need it if it's an attribute, if it's here, the attribute value. Notice like this is not. This is just text. This isn't an attribute value, and so it doesn't need those quotes. Now, if you left them off here, it may or may not still work in Chrome, just because Chrome does a good job at fixing things for you. But safe to say, safe to put them on there, because most attribute values should have those quotes. Any other questions about this so far?
Data ID that you can call it anything, it doesn't have to be a set.
Yeah, you could call it anything. Remember, this is a custom attribute that we're making up, but the convention is to prefix it with data dash. So if you're not required to, but it's a good idea because you don't want to accidentally use a real attribute name. And there are a lot of them, a lot of real ones. So using data dash is just a safe way to say, hey, this is a custom thing only for my use. And if we wanted to say add some other piece of information, we could have a data dash name or something of that nature and add that attribute as well if we want to store extra information in there. Yeah.
There's something
It's because this is a JavaScript file and we're trying to write HTML in it, and so Sublime is confused. And yeah, we're not actually running this file; we're just kind of working with it. I'm actually going to comment this out now so it fixes my syntax. Okay, so now this last one. In the following event listener function, extract the scores ID from the HTML. Okay, so if you look at this event listener, it's waiting for a button with the class +1 to be clicked. And when it is, it's going to update the score. It's going to run this update score function. So we're just going to write the first part of update score, which is going to be extracting that ID from the HTML. Okay, so we just saw how to do that. Try to put it into practice here. So we just want to extract the ID of the score button that was clicked from the HTML. It's not going to be quite as straightforward, but it's the same idea. Okay. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create just a variable called score ID once I find it. Can anybody tell me what the next step is? What should I write next? What's the next step? What's the next thing I need to write? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I pointed this way and had some ambiguous point in some answer. Right, the thing we're going to write is $this. Okay, what does that mean? Exactly. find the element in the HTML that we clicked on. Exactly. Okay, what is the element that we clicked on? Yeah. Correct. The element that was clicked on is this button. The button that has the class +1. Okay? Okay. So, what should I write next? Okay, I could write dot attribute. And then in here, what would I put? Data ID, right? That is the attribute I want to get. However, if we look at this, the thing that was clicked, does this button have an attribute, data ID? No, it doesn't. However, its parent does. Okay, its parent does. So instead of finding the attribute directly on this, we can go to the parent using jQuery's.parent and then do dot after data ID. Okay, so one more step to get to that ID here, but now we've got it.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Is putting dot parent dot twice, that will do the parent of the parent?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. If I did dot parent, I would go to, in this case, the UL. Yeah.
Since those attributes are customizable, there's a risk that there could be another element that has the same attribute, right? So,
Well, so here we're not using this as a selector. We're not saying find an element that has a data ID attribute. What we're saying is find this, the thing that was clicked on, its parent, that specific element, and tell me what is its data ID. Okay. So if it's not there, then I'll get undefined because it's not defined. But if it is there, I'll get that value. And I'm looking at a specific element at this point. So there's no risk that I might accidentally get somebody else's data ID. I think that's what you're asking, right? There is a risk, however, very slim, but there is a risk that some other JavaScript library that we have is adding attributes to our HTML, unbeknownst to us. But very unlikely it's happening. You still look a little confused.
no.
Processing. Cool. All right. Any more questions? That's basically the only last two things I wanted to review here. I think we've kind of chopped up all of the different parts of this, and hopefully now you can kind of reassemble it in your brain as you're looking over this homework. If you haven't finished it, please do keep working on it and try to make sure it all makes sense as we're moving forward. Okay. All right, well then, in that case, let's get back to Firebase. So we talked about these things. I just had them in there to remind myself. Okay, so was anybody not here last class? Okay. In the starter code, there is code that left off right where we left off last class. So you can pick up there and make sure you do go back and watch that class. For those of you who were here last class, you can either start in the code that you started last class or work from the one in the starter code. It's exactly where we left off. It's up to you. In any case, quick review. All we did last class was first we went to Firebase, the website, firebase.google.com, and we registered a new application called JS Chat. As we discussed, Firebase.com, the console there is where we can kind of manage our application, look at things like analytics and set up, as we did, some authorization providers. We enabled email and password as a authorization method for application. We can also do lots of other stuff there that we'll see in a little bit. The next thing we did is we got that code from Firebase.com. When we create a new app, there's a button that says, get the web app code, and we got that and put it into our HTML. Actually, we can see that part. I guess I'll just start from here. So we added this here. I'm just realizing if you use the starter code, you're going to be on the same application as me. So probably if you were here last time, better to use the code you started last time. Because if not, we're all going to be working in the same database, and that could get a little funky. So Firebase.com generated this code for us, and we just put it right there in our HTML, making sure that it fell before our script tag for our index.js file. Because we're going to be using Firebase, we need to make sure it's there before we get started. And then the next thing we did was we started looking at Firebase's auth API and how we can use Firebase to allow users to log into our application and register and sign out. And let's just quickly review that code too. So here in the, oops, wrong one, index.js, so we can close this. Index.js, well, we cleared out the logged in and the user portions of our model, and we left the messages there for now since we haven't gotten the real data yet there. Down here, this was all done when we started. Then we attach these event listeners to each of the sort of auth-related buttons on the page. So the first one was the register button in the register form, and when that button is clicked, we run this handle register function. Likewise for login and likewise for sign-out. Each of these is pretty simple on its own. It extracts, in the case of register and login, it extracts the email and password that the user typed in to those inputs by using .val, jQuery's .val, which gets that value out of the input. And then it used either create user with email and password from the Firebase auth module, or sign in with email and password, which logs the user in, and the former creates a new user. We also did the same for sign out. There's a sign out button, and when that button's clicked, we just run this sign out function, which takes no parameters. Now, the thing we discussed about these is, are these synchronous or asynchronous functions? Asynchronous, right? Each of these auth-related functions, sign out, create user, sign in with email and password, each of those is asynchronous, right? And the reason we know that is because it's somewhere deep down in the Firebase code, somewhere in there, it's making an AJAX call, right? It's got to communicate with the server with some HTTP API, and thus it needs to do some AJAX, which by its very definition is asynchronous. Right? So when we finish running this function, it hasn't yet completed the login process. So the way that Firebase solves this is it fires an event called auth state change whenever the sign in completes, or the register completes, or the sign out completes. So anytime the auth state, meaning are they logged in or not, changes, it will run this callback function handle auth state change that we defined. Okay? And since this is an event listener, so, semantically the same thing as these three things before it, we're just going to put it in there with the rest of our event listeners, or attaching all of our event listeners. Finally, we define this handle auth state change function. The first thing this does is use Firebase auth current user to get the current user if it is defined. We said if the user is logged in, that will be some sort of object that has user information in it. If the user is not logged in, that will be undefined, the value undefined. But we said, an object is always truthy. Undefined is always falsy. So we can say if user, if that's an object, we know we're logged in. And thus we can update the model, logged in true, user is the user. Else, if we're not logged in, we will set the logged in to false and reset the user to undefined. And then once we make those updates to the model, we'll just re-render our templates. Any questions so far? Okay, well, let's just open this again and make sure everything's still working. I'm going to open it in the browser. Notice that when I open this, because I had logged in last class, the browser actually remembered that I was logged in, and it's showing me pre-logged in. So I can hit sign out, and that will sign me out. And if I log back in, I'm once again logged in. Pretty cool. I mean, before Firebase, to just do this would have taken, 2 weeks of our time. So, we're getting a lot of juice out of this.
Firebase is awesome.
It is. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is, we've got the login portion, we've got the off portion of this working, but how do we handle those messages, right? How do we handle the data for our application, right? The real data for our application? And we're going to do that by using Firebase's database API. Okay, so last class we looked at the auth API, which is handling and managing users and authentication. The database is for handling the data of our application. In this case, it's a chat application handling the messages. So why generally, not just Firebase, but generally, why do we need databases in applications? Well, for two reasons, primarily. The first, if we ever need to persist data, okay? If we ever need to persist data, we need a database. And finally, if we ever need to communicate data to other users, we need to use a database, okay? So let's talk about what those two things mean. Persist data means if I make some change to an application, say I post a comment, right, or I like a photo, those are changes to the application. When I come back to Facebook, I expect to see that I've still posted that comment. I've still liked that photo, right? We want those changes to stick or persist over time, even when my browser closes, right? And that persistence, that keeping track of an application state from one time to the next, that happens because we store that information in a database. And the database lives on after the browser is closed. Okay, and the second reason we need to use a database is if we ever need to communicate something to another user. Right? So if I post a comment, somehow my friends, who posted the original post needs to be able to see that comment. And the way that happens is I'm going to update the database, and then my friend is going to reload the information in that database. And all of a sudden, they will see the updates that I've made. Right? And so that is how we indirectly communicate to other users, is through a database. Questions? Yeah.
So is that used to prefer over, like, can you communicate just using JSON objects?
So you can communicate using JSON objects, but the JSON object has to pass through a database. There's no way for my browser right here to communicate with your browser right there. There's no way for our browsers to communicate directly between each other. The only way I can get to you is by sending some information to a database, which you then can pull down into your computer. Right? And so that's why we need databases. And what we store in those databases could be anything. Could be, as we will see, JSON. Okay, now this is just true of all databases, right? When we talk about Firebase specifically, it gives us something even more, which is really sort of the unique and awesome draw that Firebase has. And it has something what we call a real-time database. Okay. This is something that is not common among databases. In fact, Firebase is the only one I know of that really offers this as a first-class feature. And what this means is, in a traditional database, right, I make an update. In order for my friend to see that update, they have to refresh the page or reload that data by making an AJAX request. In Firebase, when I make an update, the other users who have their browser open will immediately see that update. Right? So I could be typing something, and that could be immediately showing in somebody else's browser using Firebase.
Is that like Google's Sheets?
It's exactly like a collaborative application like Google Docs or something of that nature. That's how this is working. I mean, they don't They may or may not use Firebase underneath the hood. They may have their own thing, but that is what this means, right? We can see updates that other people are making in real time without making new requests. Yes. It's exactly so, this is a little bit more than we need to know, but it uses WebSockets in order to do this. Yes. Other questions? Since I just mentioned the word WebSockets, and I know you're probably just curious, all WebSockets does, it's different than AJAX requests. WebSockets allows a server to send data to a browser, where traditionally a browser has to request data. WebSockets allows a server to actually send data directly to the browser without it asking, and that's how it accomplishes this. It's a new technology, only became really feasible in the last couple of years. Okay, so once again, all databases persist data, all databases allow us to communicate data, but Firebase and very few databases like it allow us to do this sort of real-time data thing, like the Google Docs. I can see what other people are doing in real time. Pretty cool stuff. All right, when we are working with a database, any database, once again, this is just a database concept, not Firebase specifically, we typically are doing one of four operations. One of four operations, and we give them the acronym here, CRUD. And the first one is creating data, so creating a message. In the example of our chat application, we are reading data, getting all of the messages that are in this chat room, for instance. We are updating data, maybe liking a message or upvoting a message, as we'll see. And finally, we might be deleting data. Like there's a comment that we left and we feel bad about it, we're going to delete it. What does this remind you of? Yeah, exactly. It reminds us of HTTP request verbs, right? And if you think about it, these map directly to HTTP request verbs. So create, what is that? Which verb is, post. Create is a post, right? So when we are making a post HTTP request, what the server is doing is turning that into a create database operation. Right? So really these things map one-to-one together. A read is what? A get, update is what? Put, and a delete is a delete, right? They have the same. So that's, whenever we're interacting with data, we're generally doing one of these four things. What we call it, if we're working with HTTP requests, is get, post, put, delete. If we're working with a database, we call it CRUD. Just a bit of terminology. Okay. So let's talk about the Firebase database. There are a lot of different kinds of databases. The Firebase's database is something we call a NoSQL database. So if you've ever encountered a SQL database, an SQL database, it's what we call a relational database. So the data is in tables, and the tables have columns, and you can query those columns and join them together and do all kinds of things like that. This is not that. Okay. This is what we call a NoSQL database. It flies in the face of SQL. And what it is, basically, is just one big JSON object. Okay? So we can think of the Firebase database exactly the same way as we think of our model, really. I mean, it's almost a one-to-one mapping. It's just a JSON object that, instead of living in our application, lives on some Firebase server. Okay? So that's how the technical term is a document database, but most people call it NoSQL. But that's what Firebase is.
So that's sort of like the SQL versus NoSQL being the same as like a spreadsheet versus.
That's not a bad way to think about it. Yeah, it's not a bad way. I mean, yeah, if you're going to make analogies, that's a pretty good one. Like a spreadsheet is to SQL database as document is to NoSQL database. Yeah, that's a pretty good way to think about it, honestly. Yeah.
Which one's better?
So I mean, it's not even really subjective. There are different situations where different databases are best. And it just so happens that in web applications, a document database is generally sufficient for most use cases. And so more and more people are turning to document databases, NoSQL databases for web applications, especially because things like Firebase use them, and Firebase is really easy to use.
Are there security implications for using them?
Not really, no.
I like to think of it as flat versus deep.
It could be that. So really we're getting a little off track here, but really the key between selecting NoSQL and SQL is if you do not know ahead of time how you are going to query your database, right? If you need to do what we call ad hoc queries, right? We don't know exactly what data we need together, then SQL is really your best friend, because SQL is very good at making ad hoc queries of joining different types of data. A NoSQL database, you really need to know ahead of time exactly how you want to query your data. And if you do, you can structure your data in such a way that it's very efficient. But if you need to do sort of ad hoc things, like I need to join these two data sets together, that's not going to work real well in a NoSQL database. So, I mean, again, not particularly necessary here because we only have one choice. But in general, when deciding what database to use, that's sort of the framework to think about it. Okay, so go ahead.
So what about something like WordPress?
WordPress,
Would probably rely more on SQL.
correct. It does. It uses a database called MySQL, which is open source SQL database, probably the most common database in the world. But yes, it uses a relational database that you can join data in all kinds of different ways whenever it needs to. There are, however, CMSs that use NoSQL databases, but again. Okay, so let's take a look at this, right? This looks like a JavaScript object, because that's what it is. But this is really how we can think about a Firebase database. So this might be what the database looks like for a to-do application. So we've built several to-do applications in this class. And we kind of built the model to kind of look almost like this. Well, this is what it might look like as a Firebase database. Important to note, this doesn't actually live in our JavaScript code. Right? We're not going to actually write this in our JavaScript code. This is how we can think about the data that lives on the Firebase server. And we're going to actually load this data into our application. But we're never actually going to type this out. I'm just kind of illustrating it here as an example. Okay. So a Firebase database, just like a JavaScript object, can have keys, and those keys can have values. The first level of keys here are usually like different parts of our data, right? So we're storing our to-dos here. We may store, columns over here, or whatever it might be, different parts of our data into different segments. And we'll see this in our application as well. Just like in the last example, we had the articles section and the categories section, right? We might have the similar thing here in our Firebase database. The next thing you'll notice is these weird strings here. Right? These are a bit strange. These are IDs. Okay, so they're random strings of random numbers and letters that are created to keep track of individual things. So we can identify each individual to-do uniquely. Okay. So rather than relying on, say, an index in an array, we're going to use these random strings to keep track of, okay, where is the take out the trash to-do. Okay. So notice this to-dos, unlike our other applications, is not an array. It's an object where the keys are random strings, random ID strings. Important to note that. Okay, before we get into more of how to interact with this, I want to point out one other thing about the starter code, or the application that we started building last class. Oops. So you'll notice in this model, that look familiar? right? This almost looks like what we were just looking on that slide, right? We've got the messages here. Well, normally we'd say messages, that ends in S, it's a plural thing. It's probably an array of messages, right? Well, when we're using Firebase, instead of using that array structure, we're going to turn it into an object, and the keys will be random strings. So again, I just put this dummy data in here so I could start working on my templates and seeing what this would look like rendered. However, you know, I know it's going to be structured like this because I'm using Firebase as my database. Okay. I know that Firebase likes to structure it this way with these random IDs here at the front. Okay. And I want my dummy model to model exactly what my real data will look like. Does that make sense? Trying to model exactly what we know the database will look like. Okay, the second thing I wanted to point out, once again, notice object, not array, right? Object with random ID keys, and it's not an array of message objects. Okay, look at the index. Check this out. We're doing an each loop here for messages. But what do we say about messages? It's not an array, it's an object. So that's strange, right? It just so happens that handlebars will let us loop through an object as well as an array. So here we're looping through the object, keys and value, instead of the array. The only thing that changes here, right, we know each of the object values has an author, a text, and an upvotes property. The only thing that's changed here is we get this extra thing here at key, which is that random ID string, the key in this object. Okay? So as we are rendering the first message here, well, author, text, and upvotes, we know what that will be. At key will be this, okay? The key to this object. When we start rendering the next one, at key will be this. Okay? So at key is just a special way for us to reference the key for this object. Yes?
So this is something that creating my own handlebars for our project that I don't think was quite well explained, and I would like to go further into it, is just kind of where you're initializing on your each of the array you're passing the handlebars is super important, because, and that's what I'm asking you here is one @ sign for the key the immediate child of the array?
Right, so once again, this is a object.
Right.
It's not an array.
Whatever. In this case, it doesn't matter in my mind whether or not it's an array or an object. Is it the first child of the,
right.
So what if I wanted the key below the child? What if I wanted the child of the child, the grandchild?
So you wanted this key?
Yeah, but let's say it's just a random key and not an actual.
Okay, so we'd have to each through this, and inside of this we would have to each through this.
So you would just change where the each was depending on where you wanted to start the object itself.
Correct.
So you do each at key.
Yeah, you would, exactly.
How would you do
Good one.
each at key if it doesn't know? Is that always just going to be, well, okay, then that's my next question is, why didn't you just do each at key here necessarily?
Because I wanted to show the author in an H4, the text in a P, and the upvotes in an H5. So if I were to iterate through these keys without knowing, which one's the author, that would be weird.
But if you call it the key, then the author would still be the first child of the key. I don't understand the rules to add key here, because even if you start at messages and your model and your handlebars template is sourced off the model, which is what I believe is how you determine where you start between parent, child, and grandchild. what key actually is it guessing that this is the first non?
It's not guessing. It's very
It's
specific.
It's always the single child.
It's always going, so if we're iterating through an object, which we are, at key is each of the keys in this object. Right, so if there were another one here,
Right.
first at key will be this, author will be this, text will be this, uploads will be this.
I get that.
Yeah.
That's why you can't actually do each at key. Because it wouldn't know where to start.
You could, because you're starting here and you're saying iterate through this object.
How does it know that that's an at key?
Because at key is this.
No, I understand, but why does it know that? Previously, the rule is if you have at each messages, the at key is the first child of the message object, right?
It's not the first child, it's the keys of that object.
So how does it know that the random string of 6 digits is a key?
Because this is a definition, a key and a value.
Okay, so that still doesn't explain why does the computer say that that's a key? This is a random 6 digits,
Mhm.
and author's not a key as well.
Author
Because
is a
the
key. Author is a key, but it's a key nested one level deeper. Well, yeah, I think we have to.
So an at key is not, it's just a reference. So
Yes.
theoretically, we could do it each. Okay.
Yeah.
Because so it's not just like randomly guessing on a.
No, it's not guessing. Question.
Can you still access stuff by the dot notation even though it's not an array? So you can do it in messages.ab32.text.
Mm-hmm.
Console log?
Yep, totally. Yep. This is just a key, so you can still access it using dot notation. Messages.ab32cd4.author.
But the problem is those keys are generated randomly.
Right, so we wouldn't know.
You
Exactly. Exactly. We probably wouldn't know if we're writing this
Probably
program.
looking for something contained within its object.
Probably.
To help you identify it.
Yeah, we'll look exactly at how that's going to work here in a few minutes.
You could do a JavaScript will output a JSON node map for you on it, or jQuery will.
Well, I mean, if in the console, is that what you're asking?
No, I think there's an actual function that you can manipulate to get a JSON node key.
Yeah.
A key to the.
I mean, we could definitely figure it out, but it's not going to be easy just because they're random. So we'd have to know what we're looking for. All right, so again, I just wanted to show you that not only can we loop through arrays, we can also loop through objects, key-value pairs, right? So key and value pairs using this method. And it looks exactly the same. The only thing, we get this extra at key, which references the key of this object. Okay. And that's going to be useful for us. Notice that we've stored it here in this data-id property, or attribute, I should say.
If there are more than one key as the child of the parent, then which one does it choose? The first child, or can you specify which child it will choose? Like, for example, what if you did do the source being what we're referring to as the key right now, the random 6 digits? Which of the child parameters would it choose with that key?
Each of them.
It would go through each of them?
Yes.
Okay. So it would choose all children of a parent. if it used
Exactly.
that key.
If you use each and then an object key, it's going to go through each of the keys there. If I then went each of this, it would go through author code, text group, upload zero.
What if you weren't doing each? Which one would it pick? Would it just choose the first child?
If we weren't doing each, then we couldn't use that key.
You couldn't get its only specific.
It only works in an each. Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll start using the database.
Yes. I just think like add to key notation is for that specific. Just for
And it's a lot for this project that I've worked on these 4 or 5. And I literally updated my branch like just seconds before I made full. I was back up and we had all tests. Yeah, I know that. Emails the guy in charge. It's not all.
Or my assessment, actually, we set it up on the
Whatever it is.
So that's I would be very confused.
Yeah, and that's like we know with all the last projects we do, because something was like, oh, what, but something all screwed up. And then they were like, the best way to fix it was just to make it private. Just as only because I've heard the other things, just try it as an example. So it's a keep something.
Probably sort of contemplate.
Mad me.
Can I use that?
So,
If I know.
It's not gonna be easy. It's definitely an easy way. Yeah, let's do it.
For example, you've done it's a backwards sound. So the way I do that is I photo.
It's all that matters.
Let's say I did something further about PBJ, exactly something about.
No J.
Okay, so that was right.
Oh, no, Jay?
So you just have to add a format. It's just
Peanut butter?
yeah.
You know, you use a lot of those.
So,
I had a friend who worked with a boyfriend, so she moved in with me and my wife for like 2.5 months. She like, instead of like eating, she would eat a sandwich. Or eat a PB&J sandwich. Yeah. For like dinner, and then she'll come home. Yeah.
We're gonna have to look at the results.
yeah, usually if I have
So let's look at the data.
Another 4 weeks. Yeah.
So for example, if mine's gonna have like, I'm gonna come and say, get like, we're gonna use this for my rate. And I would say, you should use some access.
Yeah, so I don't see a year here.
Yeah, is that, this is my, this is my indicator values, and if I.
No, no, he said the opposite.
whatever it
See
means.
this was.
When they're trying to figure out their immigration status.
Yes.
Yes, today.
Year and then a dash.
She
Yeah,
was
so
stating
what you could do is
she
you
is
could
a,
loop through,
rather
this is a
unfortunately,
list, right,
you're
it's the years and values.
new.
Look through this list, maybe an empty list up here,
In modeling,
to store years,
included in
and as we move through, add the years in there.
that.
To that list.
and you have another
Just
list
like
of
all
values.
those darn immigrants that.
Here, you have things there. Something of that. Could be any kind of.
Like it.
Yeah. Could be a regular.
Although she
order.
had since last year. Wow.
Yeah, some
No, actually, please, comment whenever it's
Gone
going
through
to
and done all
go
years of
Well, the race was two, I'm now 30.
I feel like the Lord wants to live there.
Do something for each thing.
Yeah.
So I feel like you're good. I'm like, wow.
Even though this is either way.
Hey, I'm gonna spicy. I'm gonna spicy.
If it's an object, there are ways to
Spicy.
spice through objects.
You may not know what you get.
But you may have to look at.
It's more like I'm so tired that I don't know.
I'll take that to dinner. Most lavish restaurants. So, boyfriend who? Today I'm You're correct.
What's your boyfriend do to you?
Is this a puppy? Oh.
No, we have this thing now. It's like you're bringing boyfriend.
Talking about this while we
Only 12 years.
I know, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like all around. Just look at the reviews and stuff. As you see reviews, like something doesn't.
It's okay. Yeah,
Once you
yeah.
have your plugin installed, create the.
Mine didn't go off either.
I know, right?
12 years. Is it as you are?
I don't know.
Exactly. We're like, fuck our rights.
Come on.
Give you JSON.
We've been oppressed by all of humanity for thousands of years. Fucking like we have.
I know this is really. No, it's no, I definitely, I'm very strong. So in this case, there are some numbers around every. Even though I live on the neighborhood, like 20 miles away.
Yeah, you do. You really do. That was my question.
Yeah.
But
Basically, all you need to do is have like someone.
So I'm-
words that is running. that you can use. So
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to do other things. I just.
That's what that's.
I mean, they. A lot of people. I like me.
Yeah, just
I didn't get all that.
Yeah, so if you have these.
But they have you know, so clearly they were controls or forced to. I don't know.
That sounds
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, we have such a wonderful. Culture.
I am not.
Okay,
Because.
And you
Okay,
can
so-
you just did it.
This is
Shut your fucking mouth.
Okay.
Stop on.
Here we can just tell it.
I mean- we are Methodism. We should.
So let's do that.
Yeah. I don't
There's a
know
lot
why.
of, there's a lot of good.
Actually,
No.
you may have to set it up so that it's tracked.
You don't want to throw out
Well, I
the.
can do that. I didn't, I never would do it.
Yeah, nice.
Thank you.
No problem.
Next time I got.
Awesome.
That's,
Yeah, no, it's wrong, man. Or, that's, see,
It's
a little kid in the shop. Remember that gorilla, the kid who fell into the.
Oh, yeah, oh my
It's
God.
funny you did that, because you're the
Oh, yeah.
All right,
Like, this is a great idea.
so let's get back to it. So we're talking about the database. We went in to just do a brief tangent to talk about why I set up the model that way, our dummy model with those random strings and all that, why I set it up that way. Well, the reason I did is because that's what the model, that's what the data in the database is going to look like. This is what the database is going to look like. So it's helpful for us if we, in our dummy model, do something similar. And I just like pound the keyboard to come up with these things, so I'm making dummy data. There's no method to the madness. All right, so we know the database looks like this. What we need to do is we need to find things inside of our database. That's really our first task, is how do we find different parts of our database? And the way we do that is by using a reference, okay? So we need a reference to different parts of our database. So we use this firebase.database, just like we did firebase.auth. Firebase.database.ref, which means get a reference to some key in our database. Okay? So some key in the database. So if our database looks like this, okay, and we want to access in some way the to-dos in our database, well, the way we can do that is by getting a reference to the to-dos key. Yeah. How are you able to see?
Yeah, how do you go to keys?
Well, because you put it there by adding some data there in the past, perhaps. There is, as we'll see in a minute, a database explorer in Firebase. You can go to your Firebase console and actually look to see what's in your database at any given time. Yeah, but the only reason we know it's there is because, well, we either are planning for it to be there, or we've added stuff there in the past.
Any like Chrome extensions or any programs that would allow us to visually work with data?
Well, no, you don't.
Like a SQL front end.
Let's go ahead and do this. Let's go to the Firebase console again. I was going to do this later, but since we have questions about it, let's go ahead and do it now. I'm just going to Google Firebase. It's probably the first link, the one with the ad, firebase.google.com. And if you haven't set up an application here before, you'll probably need to do that. So go ahead and set up an application. I am already logged in, so I'm going to go to my console up in the upper right-hand corner. And I'm here. We're working. Mine is called JSChat1. So I'm going to click on my application. And once you're in here, well, last time we looked at this auth tab, which showed us, well, now it'll show us our users. But we also have a database tab, okay? And this database tab will show us visual representation of everything in our database. So right now, if you'll notice, the only thing in our database is null, nothing, because we haven't added anything yet. We could actually, if we wanted, start adding stuff directly here. But I'm not going to do that. So we'll come back to here as we're playing with this. We could see how the JavaScript we write affects the data in our database. It's actually pretty cool. Okay, so now that we've got that reference to this portion of the database, we're going to use it to do our CRUD operations, right? Our create, read, update, delete operations. All right, so let's do that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create some data. So we can use this firebase.database.ref, get a reference in our database, we do that to-do scheme, and then we can push data into that portion of the database. So in the past, we've used this push method, a push method, to push data onto an array. Okay? So conceptually, the data that we have in this to-dos is almost like an array, right? It's a list of to-do things. However, it just so happens that it's actually an object with random ID keys. But we use the same method name here, push, in order to put new data into that object. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. If we have this database initially, right, we've got this to-dos key. We've got two to-do objects in there. One with a random key CD, JJ, etc., and one with a random key KJ, HU, etc. The first one says go to store, it's not completed. The second one says take out trash, it is completed. Okay? So if this is where we start, we could then push some new data into this to-do section of our database by first getting a ref to that key in the database, and then using push to push a new object into that portion of the database. Okay, so I'm pushing a new object with the text go to class, and we're going to start it off as completed false. All right, so I'm just pushing a new object. That's what these curly braces are, an object. Just pushing that new object into this database. And what results is this. Down here, the bottom of my to-dos, I've got a new random key, new random ID here, but the text go to class and completed false are what I just put inside. Does everybody see how that worked? Question? I saw a question hand. Maybe I answered it. I'll assume I did. Okay, so once again, we start here with just the 2 to-dos in there. Down here, we can get a reference to the to-dos and push a new object on there. And the result of that is now the to-dos has 3 objects. The third one being the one we just added.
Who generated the key? Did Firebase generate the key?
Correct. Firebase is generating this random key. We're not doing that part. When we push, that's what happens. It makes a random key and puts it in there.
And you force it to do that by adding an object that doesn't have the appropriate parent, essentially?
No, push, by its very nature, that's what push does, is put in a random key and put the thing that you're pushing as a value to that key.
This is because it's Firebase.
Exactly, because we're doing Firebase database ref push. Yes, exactly.
Is this universal notation or just for Firebase?
This is just for Firebase. This push method is completely different than array.push.
So let's say someone has to do an import or an export to another site. They have to do something or another.
Well, I mean, so this is just a document database, and what can be represented in this document database could be represented in any document database. There may be some amount of migration that happens, but that's it's not possible to get around that when you're switching databases. You've got to migrate the data.
Yeah.
Can you push without the ID?
No. If you push, it creates an ID.
Can you add data without the?
Yes. There's another method for adding data if you don't want a random ID.
How do you disallow that?
As soon as if you get a ref that doesn't exist and push something there, it's going to create it automatically. More questions? We'll see this in action. Okay, we're going to take a look at our database beforehand. We're going to push some data into that, and then we'll take a look at our database again afterwards. Okay, so let's do this. Let's turn to our code. So first of all, just once again note, empty database. JS chat 1, no, nothing in there. Right? Nothing in there at all. Okay, let's turn to our code. So if we look back at our HTML, if we're logged in, instead of having this register and login form, we have this comment form. We already implemented what to do when the sign out button is pressed. What we need to do now is implement what to do when the comment button is pressed. Okay, so what's the first thing we're going to do here?
Event listener.
Right, the first thing we're going to do is set up an event listener. And where here in our JavaScript should we set up that event listener?
Under event listeners.
A cacophony of answers, but yes, we're going to put it down here in the setup function along with the rest of our event listeners. Question?
Does it matter where it goes?
No, the order of these doesn't matter. The order within here doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to put it right here. I'm just going to separate it from all my auth listeners just visually so I can kind of see where the auth stuff ends and where the database stuff begins. Just a personal preference. Well, I can listen to that same parent because this is also part of the form. So I'm going to listen to that same static parent, the one that I know is always there. And on the click event for the comment button, right? The button with the ID comment in this case, instead of the ID, register, login, sign out. We're looking for the button with the ID of comment. We're going to run some function. Just by the convention that I've kind of set up here, I'm just going to call it handle comment. All right. Okay, so the next step, as we know, is we've got to define that function. I'm going to put mine here just so I can keep everything together. But you know, if you wanted to put it at the bottom of your event listeners, you could do that as well. So we're going to define a new function. Give it the name, handle comment. And what do you think is the first thing that we need to do in this function? Yeah, yes. Exactly. We have to extract from the HTML the value that the user typed in. Exactly right. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we'll do is create a variable here. I'm just going to call it comment. And then we'll use jQuery to find, in this case, it's a text area element. It's not an input, which we've used for most things. This is a text area, which is sort of the bigger box where you can do multiple lines of text. And if we look over here, that text area has a name message. So we'll use that name message in order to find this thing. So again, I know it's a text area. I know that it has an attribute name equal message. So that's CSF selector speak for find a text area element that has an attribute name with a value message. Notice the square bracket notation could be used for any attribute, including, say, a data-id attribute. Just something to note. Well, we're not actually going to use that today, but it's something that may come in handy in the future. All right, and what we want out of there is the value that the user typed in, jQuery's .val. Okay, now we've got the message. The only thing left for us to do is to put that message into the database, to create some new data in the database. So we're going to do that by starting off with Firebase .database. .ref, and we're going to call this part of our database messages. I guess I'm using comment and messages, a bit confusing. Maybe I should standardize. Oh well. Right, so when I use push, if this part of the database doesn't exist yet, it'll just create it for me. Okay, so the first time you push, I am creating that messages portion of it. But on subsequent times, it's just adding to it since it's already there. But the first time you push, yes, it is making this new part of the database. You could, yeah, you could. If two applications want to share the same data, no reason you couldn't do that. Yeah. Yeah, so not only could I have messages, but I could have a to-dos ref too. I could use both of them to store different. I could have this be a comment and to-do app if I wanted to. It'd be kind of weird shoving those two things together, but you could totally do that.
So if it already exists, it'll just target it, right?
Correct.
Does it matter where it is in the parent file?
Yes, it does matter. If I'm using database.ref, that's getting only the first level of keys, right? Only the keys that are on the top level of my database.
Do you use dot notation inside the quotation marks to target children?
No, but something similar. You can use slashes instead of dots. But we'll talk more about that in a second. Okay, so now we've got this reference to the messages key in our database. We're going to push some new data into that portion of our database. Okay? All right, so we already know what we want our data to look like, right? Because we have this dummy data up here. Okay? We want it to look like this. So I'm just going to copy one of these messages. And the reason we want it to look like this is because that's what our template's assuming. You know, we've already designed our template to work with this kind of data. You know, so we've created this model sort of in our head to kind of model exactly what things we want to show. Okay, so we're going to push an object that looks kind of like this, but we're going to change the author, the text, and the upvotes. So how do you think we're going to get the author? Yeah, so if you remember, when we logged in, we stored a user object in the model. Okay, that user object has a bunch of things in it, but one thing it has is an email address. So I could say model.user.email. What do I put here in the text instead of foobar? Right, I have a variable up above where I've stored the text that the user typed in, the string that the user typed in. So I'm going to put that in the text portion of this object. Finally, what should we put for upvotes? We could try undefined. It may get tricky if we want to like do addition with it later. Is it undefined? Is it not? Better to start it off at 0, right? 0 upvotes. Okay.
Where's it pulling the comment from? It's pulling it from
The text area.
no.
There's a text area.
Comment.
Sorry. No, that's all right. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this and let's add one comment and then go back to our database viewer. So I'm going to just refresh this page here. It'll notice that I'm still logged in. Hopefully it notices you're still logged in too. And then I'm going to say, hello world. Lots of exclamation points. Now I'm going to hit this comment button and then flip over to the other tab. Comment, nothing's happening yet. But if we look over here in our Firebase console, look what's appeared. There's a messages key, and if we open that up, there's a random value here, and if we open that up, we see all of this. Hello, my email address, text hello world, upvote 0. I can see several people are using my starter code. I'm seeing your comments come in. That's okay.
Oops.
That's all right. We can use the same database. It just means we're going to see each other's chats. So that's pretty cool, right? We can explore the data in here. I mean, it doesn't look exactly like JSON, but you can see, right? This is a key. These are the values. There's the random string key. And then inside of there is the author, the text, and the hello world, and 0 upvotes. Anybody having trouble getting that to work?
Show up in the database.
Are you using my starter code?
No.
Okay. Then check out the console and see if there's any.
Oh, there we go.
No.
So many messages.
It's set up.
It's like pressing it.
further to that.
Actually, this is how they use it.
That's good. So that means probably achieve 7 characters. Anybody else having trouble still? Yeah. So all we've done is create the data. We haven't read any data. Now, the reason you're not seeing it is because you're adding it to like you're using my starter codes. Yeah. Which is hooking this link to my application.
Oh, I'm sending my, oh, I see.
Yeah.
Got it.
So if I would have done this last few, it's probably just saying.
Okay, got it.
Which is cool because
No, it's just, let's bring it to the fit.
What you do wrong?
You're playing wrong.
I mean, it's what? It's not American. Like, you're just I would have different songs for $10 beer for shitty beer.
There you go.
It's also like $5.
Okay, so now we're adding data. This is pretty exciting, right? We're adding data. It's here. We can see it. We can feel it. Now we just have to get that last step. Well, not the last step. The next step. We need to get it back into our application so we can actually see it there instead of those 2 comments that won't leave, right? Okay, so that's our next step. So here we are at the C, right? Our next letter in this acronym is the R, read data. Okay? So read data. Now reading data is a bit different than creating it. It's actually a bit different than the create, update, or delete. Those are sort of one-time things that we just do whenever that event happens. Right? So whenever the user hits that comment button, you're going to push some data. In Firebase, reading data is something that's happening all the time. So other users might be commenting, at different points of time, and we want to know every time those users update their, write new comments or update their old comments or whatever. We want to know about those things as they're happening. So reading is something that happens all the time rather than just once. Question?
Is there an event that's triggering that, or is it just like set on the timer?
Yeah, so in the before a world where these things called WebSockets exist, before that happened, then yes, that's how it worked. It's called polling. It would check like maybe every 10 seconds, is there new data? Is there new data? Is there new data? Is there new data? Right? It would do that indefinitely. In the new world, in the last couple of years, there's this technology called WebSockets. And that allows a server to tell a browser that there's new data. So it doesn't have to check. The server can just tell us that, hey, there's some new data. And that's actually how Firebase works.
So there's something in the way the ground is written now that is able to website.
Right, exactly. So the server keeps track of all the browsers that are attached to it, and it can send information to them as it wants. It's actually really cool, but super cutting edge technology. Okay, so again, pushing data is pretty simple, right? We're just going to do it one time, and now that data is updated. When we want to read data, what we're going to do is we're going to set up an event listener. Okay, so once again, return the event listener. And here what we're listening for is every time the value of that data changes. So every time the value of the data in the database changes, we want to know and we want to be able to run some function. Okay? So just like every time a button is clicked, we want to run some function. Every time the auth state changes, we want to run some function. It's the same concept, but here, instead of one of those events, the event we're listening for is every time the value changes. I really wish this event name was called like value change or something, but in Firebase, they just call the event.value. So here it is, we get the reference to the part of the database that we care about, and then we do .on. .on, and the event name in this case that we care about is the value event, which happens every time the data changes. So every time the value in the database changes, we want to know about it. And when that happens, we're going to just run some function. Okay? So let's take a look a little bit how this works. Here is the data. Okay? Here's the data. Right? As we've seen before, we've got this to-dos key, and then inside of there, some random data. Here is how we could read the data in the database. The first thing we do is we get a ref to the to-dos, that portion of the database. And then we attach an event listener that says on the value event, anytime the value changes, run the process to-dos function. Okay? So run the function process to-dos. In this function, we get a parameter here called snapshot. So we get this parameter only because this is a Firebase database event listener, right? And because it's a Firebase database event listener, because we've attached it to a ref.on, we get this snapshot. And the snapshot is a picture of what the database looked like as soon as this value changed. So what data is in there, a snapshot of that data inside of there as soon as it changed. Now there's a bunch of things in the snapshot, like when was the last time it changed, and where is it in the database, and all of these things. But the thing that we really care about is the value of the data. So we do snapshot.val to get the value of the data. So when we do snapshot.val, what we're getting is this object. Okay. So the snapshot.val will give us this object here. Okay. We can then take that object and we can store it in our model. That object there. Okay, let's start implementing this. So, this is a trick question. This is an event listener, right? What we're doing here is we're setting up an event listener. So where do you think we might put that? Okay, right. The obvious answer is here in the setup with the rest of our event listeners. And that would be great. It would be nice. However, it's not going to work for us. And the reason is, in order to read data from the database, you must be logged in. Okay, so you must be logged in order to have permission to read from the database. Okay, we know that this setup function runs as soon as the page loads, at which point the user is not yet logged in. So if we try to attach the event listener here, it's not going to work because the user doesn't yet have permission to read from the database.
So after they logged in.
Okay, so exactly. So what we need to do is somehow attach the event listener after we know the user is logged in. So where might that be? Exactly. The place we're going to attach it is in our handle auth state change function, which is the place where we know the user has just logged in. Okay? So specifically, can we just throw it anywhere in this function?
I would throw it in the user, sure.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Just create another function and only call the function once it hits, just for the sake of cleanliness.
Like create another function and call it here?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could totally do that. You could totally do it. But it's only one line, so I'm just going to put it here. So here, in this if block, right here, this is where we know the user has just logged in, right? Because we know the auth state has changed. That's when this function runs, when they either log in or log out. And this conditional here is to determine whether they logged in or they logged out. Okay? So right here, we know that they're logged in, and we know we have permission to read from the database. And thus, this is where we're going to attach that event listener. So we're going to type in Firebase .database parentheses .ref messages. And then we're going to use .on. The event we're listening to is what? Does anybody remember? Value. Exactly. We're listening to the value event. And when that happens, we need to run some function. I'm just going to call that function process messages. We could call it whatever we want. I'm going to call mine process messages. Okay, we're not done yet, obviously. The next thing we have to do is we just referred to this function process messages, but we haven't yet defined it. So we need to go ahead and define this function called process messages. So I'll go ahead and put that right up here. Again, the order of these functions doesn't actually matter. I'm just kind of grouping them so we can see all the stuff going on in the screen at once. So I'm defining a new function here called process messages. What do we say about these event listener functions that are listening for database changes in Firebase? How should I change this code that I have here? Yeah. Exactly. I need to add the snapshot parameter to this function. I need to do that because Firebase is going to send us a snapshot argument when it calls that function internally. And that snapshot is how we access the data in the database. So, just for clarity, I'm going to create a variable here. I'm going to call it messages. And I'm going to assign it the value snapshot.val. So when I get that, that's going to be that object where the keys are the random IDs and the values are my actual message objects. And each of those message objects has an author, some text, and a number of upvotes. Okay, what do you think I'm going to do with that messages object? What should I do with it now? Do what? Right, we need to store this. We need to put it into our model. Okay, so now we're at the point where we're ready to update the model with real data. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go up to my model and get rid of the fake data. So this is fake data. I was just using it to help me with develop my templates. I don't actually need it. I don't really want it. It's not real. So I'm going to just erase it. So I could do this. I could maybe do undefined, whatever I want. Okay. So down here, once I've got these messages out of my snapshot, the next thing I've got to do is I've got to update my model. I know that the model has a messages key, and in that messages key, I'm going to store the messages from the line before. So I could have easily done this in one line, right? If I had just done snapshots.value right there, I could have easily done this in one line. But I wanted to just split it into 2 steps, to be clear. Okay, now that I've updated the model, gotta re-render, precisely. The model and the HTML are out of sync. The HTML has old data, the model has new data. So in order to get the HTML in sync, we need to render the templates. Specifically, we need to render the chat template, the one that has the messages in it. We could re-render them both, it wouldn't hurt anything, but I'm gonna re-render just the chat one. Okay, are we ready to see if this worked? Okay, I'm going to go back into the browser. And I'm going to refresh. A bunch of people have been using mine, so I'm probably going to see quite a few. And I do. And any of you people who are using mine, you will probably see my messages as well, or you should see my messages as well. And if I add a new one, I'm going to say hello world in all caps. A comment, I should see down here at the bottom, my newest message shows up immediately. So these are in chronological order, right? So this is the oldest, these are newer. We can maybe change that if we wanted to, but we're not worried about that right now. So everybody able to read the messages in your database? Pretty cool, right? And what you'll notice is, well, we'll look at that in a second. Okay, one thing that I don't like about this is when I hit this comment button, it doesn't clear out this text field. It leaves that thing there, which makes me not really sure if it worked or not as a user. So I'm just going to clear that out when we press that comment button. So here in index.js, here in this handle comment, after I get the comment out of there, out of the input, on the next line, I'm going to reset the value to an empty string. It's going to empty out that text area so the user knows that, hey, that worked. Just a reminder, this .val, along with like .attr and .css in jQuery, has this sort of dual nature, right? These two uses. On this line, we're using it with no parameters in order to get the value. On the next line, we're using it with one empty string parameter in order to set the value. Right? So we can do both things, depending on if we pass in arguments or not. Okay. Let's see, we're at a pretty good breaking point. So let's go ahead and just take our second break now, and then we'll come back and finish this up. We got two more things, update and delete. And then we're actually going to deploy this. It's going to be fantastic. Yeah.
Messages? This gives me a little bit of also, sitting on my you just learned this now. Can you imagine how you add it to a book on bracket? And then you just command bracket. Instead of trying to do this, just like you got it, you know. Actually,
Firebase, like, yeah,
I have a partner who works for himself.
yeah, and that when
So
you're
he finds the clients to do his own business. He fell asleep already. He literally just fell asleep in front of us. Bro, go home and sleep. Why not?
Figured out in Slack, and then I just opened it up and I yeah,
Really?
yeah. And I figured when I was going Yeah. That's the sound. And then it's not like beating up files everywhere. So, but online, it shows up, and then it counts, but it's not pushing it back. So all my comments are going in there.
In your event,
I'm not gonna spray it out.
in your database, it's showing.
Yeah. Database is showing.
Have you been talking about this before?
Did.
Damn.
No,
So
it's
really,
really-
you can slash. Let me just make sure mine's.
Mine's working.
I mean, mine was.
I just,
It's not it's taking the database, but what's happening is it's not pushing it back.
now we add event listeners to
This is
L's.
not.
Yes.
Buttons. We got 2 more buttons.
So something's wrong.
I mean, it's not reading. Paul's nice.
How do I even,
So
how do I do this? I don't know how to use this.
The idea that he doesn't use a mirrored screen blows my mind. He's very good at this.
Because everything else is working fine. My data is going into my database. What's happening is it's not coming back from the snapshot.
Did you not update it at the right point?
Yeah, process message snapshot. This is where it's going on. Snapshot that found.
Yeah, you didn't render the form. You didn't render.
And render chat, you have to do it.
You rendered that? I didn't know.
You go to your,
Did she clear? Did she
one
clear
to
the
try
values?
just doing.
I'm trying to.
Hey, did she? No, it's not messages. That's fine. You're right there. Does she clear the value of the text box before the text box value is grabbed? No, that's right. Did you spell the function right of the process messages? Are they the same? No, they're the same.
But this message is just a message. That's the rep.
Yep. Wait, no, that's not it.
Wait.
No, that's not
This
it.
is not, that's
No,
pretty
it's-
neat.
yeah.
Hey, save it and then do put a break on that actual your JavaScript. Break on it.
Do you want to? And then we use that.
Put a break in there on the process manager. It doesn't matter really, but leave them. Comment. No. Okay, so this is the problem. Actually, don't let me just say I don't know what that is. Let's go run one. Yeah, you're not getting anything for your multi means. That's why it's not driving something. See now.
What is it?
First of all, you can tell if the data is so let's check out the
So these units, we're very happy with that. It was, we had a long time, we were all about 100%. Yeah, it's really fun.
Okay, so you can get here you have the left to yeah, you've already pushed the message in there, so I would change the one that's now.
Yeah. No, wait, that's the creator.
No,
Oh, no, that's,
it has to be consistent.
okay, so this is the creator. And this is what it's called. So one X.
Hey, I was working hard. I was about to.
Yeah, you would've got it.
It was, yeah. But I the other stuff.
Sorry, I was like,
No, it's okay.
is there anything I might have missed at the beginning of that class?
At the beginning, we just did a little more review
Oh,
stuff.
okay.
So
Okay.
if you feel good about the last lab, then
I don't think I'll ever feel good about that lab like ever.
Well,
But
yeah, you will.
it's hard.
yeah, you can go back and watch it if you want.
Okay, I am probably gonna come to this Monday to do a
Awesome.
review about it.
Sounds
So,
good.
Yeah. No, I think it's really good code. I just still trying to wrap.
Yeah, it takes a while.
I don't have just like tenacity and
Everybody's on a little bit different level.
I'm the dumbest person in this class. I don't know what you're talking about.
Whatever, I swear.
I'm like, you should see my homework, it was awful. I shouldn't say that. Straight off.
I mean, it's your homework for you, I guess, you know?
Yeah.
But the CSS for this JS chat is from like 2001.
I wrote it myself.
You did, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, I know it. I just threw it together.
You mean you didn't load any medias?
Listen.
Oh, there, like, come on, bro.
Yeah.
I touch CSS like a few times a year.
Really?
Yeah. I mean,
That bootstrap themes, they're excellent. That explains a lot.
it's not. It's because I'm doing other stuff. Like, I barely get into front end these days anyway.
So you're, I mean, you classify yourself as a front end developer or
No, I full stack.
full stack? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I primarily do backend
You
stuff.
don't classify as awesome.
Okay,
An awesome classification.
No, you got me that.
I just want to show you something cool while we're getting ready to start working on the other stuff. Here on the right, I've got my data viewer. Here on the left, I've got my application running. So these are in the same order as I'm seeing here, right? Check this out. I can open this up in the data viewer. This says hello world right now. I can type in test, test, hit enter, and notice it changed over here in my application as soon as I did that. So I could change this to this is so cool. Hit enter, and you'll see this updated right over here on the left. I could also,
Like, that's not what I said.
yeah, I could delete that one, and it's gonna give me a big warning, and then you'll see it disappeared. Right. So this is a way for you could even put your fake data in the
It's
database.
so fast.
Yeah,
How is Firebase free? This should be illegal.
yeah, it's pretty cool because they make money if your app's successful. Right?
That
They
is
want you
so
to be successful.
That is so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, think of like the amount of APIs and WebSocketing that they're handling right now, and it's all API-ified, and it's all.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awesome tool. Top of its class. All right, so let's continue. We've got a couple more database operations to talk about. The next one is update, right? It's CRUD, right? Update. So we've got these messages. If you noticed, when we looked at the messages, they all have this. Well, let's talk about the to-dos first. So here's how we update. We get a ref. We can then, inside of that ref, we can find a child. Okay? So a child, meaning one of the objects inside of that portion of our database is a child. We can find it by its key. In this case, they're the random ID keys that are generated by Firebase. And then once we have that child, we can call .update and pass it some updated values, whatever values we want to update. Okay? So let's take a look at this example. Once again, going back to our to-dos. All right. So here we have our to-dos object, database, this object here. This is what it looks like now. If we wanted to update this and say we want to complete this first task. Right now, its completed value is false. The user has just like clicked the checkbox or whatever, and now we want to mark this as completed. The way that we would do that is we would do firebase.database.ref to-dos. We get that ref to-dos portion of our application. We then find the child with the appropriate ID. Okay, so if I go back here, that's CDJJ32. That's the one that we want to update here. It has this key CDJJ32. So we can find that child by its key. We then call .update, and we pass to .update an object with just the updating values. So this is an object. The only thing we want to change in that object is the completed key. We want to change it to true. So we're going to just pass an object that has the things that we want to update in it. Okay. So again, this is an object. It's using these curly braces. There's one there and one there. Sorry, this is not the best way to look at this. I'll scroll it, but we'll see it in a second in more detail. And when we do that, the result is going to be this. Okay? It looks about the same, but you'll notice now the completed key is true for the CDJJ object. Okay? So if we wanted to update the text, we could have done that too by passing a text key in that object and to update with some new edited text, say, if we wanted to do that. Okay. Are we ready to try this in our application? Cool. So if we switch back over here, we'll notice, okay, well, what about this application is updatable? Right, so we have these messages. If you'll notice, there are two buttons in each of these messages. The one on the left is an upvote button. Okay, so when somebody clicks that button, what we want to do is increment this upvote value by 1. Okay? So let's attempt to do this. I'm going to switch over to Sublime. What is the first thing we need to do? We need to set up an event listener. And just in English and big, from a high level, what are we doing? What are we listening for? Exactly. There's this upvote arrow button. We want to know when has that button been clicked. So let's take a look at our index.html. We scroll down. We see, okay, here's the messages HTML. And inside of there, there's two buttons. One that has a upvote class and one that has a delete class. Well, can we attach an event listener directly to these buttons? No. Why not? Exactly. So this is in a template. It's not going to be there right away when the page loads. So we need to use this delegated event listener strategy. So let's look up here at the HTML, and we'll see here's a div with an ID chat log. This one we know because it's in the HTML. That one will always be there. So we'll attach our event listener to there, and we're going to delegate the event for the .upvote button. So here's where I have all of my event listeners, other than that one for listening to data for the aforementioned reasons. And we're going to attach to the chat log the thing that we know is going to be there. Oh, we're listening for a click event. And the selector of the thing where that click is actually happening is a class called upvote. What do you think I'll call this function?
Handle upvote.
Yeah. I'm going to call it handle upvote. Huh. Yeah. I'm thinking of upvote as one word.
Still frozen. It's now under database.
What's that?
Just like the order of upvotes.
Well, it doesn't matter because really all we're doing here is attaching the listener. But neither of these events have happened yet. We're just attaching that listener and getting it set up. Yeah.
So maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but on this particular event that we're going to do, this function, we're not going to actually want to call the data of the actual value, because what if lots of people were using this? You just want to add to the data value that's already in the database.
Mm-hmm.
You never want to call it because at that time somebody else could have already added an upvote, and then the database will put the value that you wanted back in that's on the client side. So how would you update just the value, like have the Firebase update the database value itself without ever reaching the client? Because as soon as it reaches the client, you have the option to make a mistake of.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a distributed database problem. I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know if Firebase has a good answer for that. The only thing you could do is you could instead of storing a number here, you could store like a timestamp or something of when it was upvoted and like count them. But for this, it's not super critical. I know what you're saying, but we're not going to solve that right now.
How would I Google that problem?
You could Google like Firebase atomic transactions or something. It would probably be the. Now, it only matters in this case where we're taking the value and creating the new value based on what's already there. If we're changing it entirely, it doesn't matter. Firebase will order them for us. Okay, getting a little off topic. So handle upvote. We've added this function. We need to now define it. So I'm going to say function handle upvote. Okay.
There's a transaction function.
There you go. There you go. Okay, so what are we going to do here? Well, what we want to do is we want to take whatever upvote value is there, and we want to add one to it. And then we want to send it back and update it in the database. Okay? All right, so how are we going to find how many upvotes this currently has? Okay, well, the first thing that we can do, if we take a look back at our index.html, what you'll notice is we've stored in the template the random ID as a data-ID. Okay, so we're going to use this, okay, in order to figure out what's going on. So I'm going to have a variable here called message ID. And in order to figure out what that message ID is, well, I'm going to use jQuery this. And what is this in this function? So what is this specifically in this function? The button, correct. Right. Since we're listening to .upvote is a button right here. So this is that button. So we want that button's parent, which is the list item. Or I guess it's a div, sorry. It's the div, and that div has a data ID attribute, and that's where the ID lives. We can use .after to get the data-ID. There's probably lots of ways to go about this, but now that we have this message ID, if we look at our model, if what we know is in our model now, it's going to look like this, right? I mean, of course, this says messages, and these are message objects, but this is what it'll look like, right? I'll say messages, there'll be an object, and the keys in this object are these IDs. In other words, one of those IDs that we just got out of the HTML. So we can use that key that we just got out of the HTML in order to access the actual message in the model. So we can say var message is equal to our model. Where in our model are the messages stored?
In an array.
Dot messages. And where is an individual message stored? At a key, okay? So I could access it with dot notation, right? If I knew exactly what that key was, right? I don't know exactly what it is as I'm typing this, right? It's a variable key. And since it's a variable key, I have to use bracket notation in order to access
Oh, I see.
the value at
That's
that
why
key.
we got the message ID.
Yes. So if I had done messages.message ID, I'd be looking for a message with a message ID of message ID, literally saying message ID in the database. That's not what we want. What we want is the value of message ID. And if anytime we have a variable key, we need to access an object with bracket notation. So now we've got that message. We know that message has 3 properties, right? It has an author, it has text, and it has a number of upvotes. So we can say the variable upvotes is equal to our message dot upvotes. Okay, we're accessing the value at that key upvotes. If this is a new message and this is the first time we're upvoting it, that is equal to 0 at this point. All right, we're now ready to update the database because now we know how many upvotes it needs. We know that the new number that we want to give it is 1 more than that, so we're just going to add 1 to that number. So we're pretty much ready to update our database. Okay? So the way that we're going to do that, once again, is we're going to type in Firebase .database parentheses. And then what do we need to do? Does anybody remember? Exactly. We need a reference to a part of our database, specifically the messages part of our database. Now, we don't want to update the whole messages part of our database. We could do that, but that's not what we want. We don't want to update all of the messages. What we want to do is update a specific child message. And which child message do we want to update? What should I type in between these parentheses?
You're going to want the message ID.
Exactly. We want to use the messages ID. Okay? So remember, what goes into child is the key of the thing that we're looking for. And if we look at what the models look like, the keys are these, the IDs. So what we're looking for is to-dos. We're looking for the child with the specific ID. So in our case, it's messages. We're looking for the message with a specific ID. So if we're thinking about the database as a JavaScript object, what we're really saying here is our database dot messages dot message ID. All right, back to the message ID. Well,
You're going to look inside that for the upvote value, right?
exactly. Well, we're going to update the upvote value.
Updates, I mean,
So now that we have, not only are we getting a reference to the messages, we're getting a reference to the specific child in that messages object. We're now going to call update, not upvote, update. Oops. And when we call update, we're going to pass it an object. And inside that object, we're going to put the key and value of the things we want to update inside that message. So if we wanted to update the text, we could say update the text to say, new text or whatever it might be. But we don't want to update the text. We want to leave that the same. We want to leave the author the same. Only thing we want to update in this case is the number of upvotes.
We don't have upvotes in our model. We specified in our model yet.
We did.
Yeah.
When we created
Oh yeah, never mind.
When we created a message, we gave it an author, a text, and a number of upvotes. So up here, what we're updating is just the number of upvotes. So we're just going to say upvotes is equal to how many upvotes were there before, this variable here, plus 1. One more than was there before.
Is it bad to make the upload variable uploads the same things?
No. I mean, if it's confusing to you, then you can change names, but no, it doesn't. I mean, because anything on the left-hand side must be a key, right? It has to be a literal key. Anything on the right-hand side it must be a variable, right? So here are two different things. This is referencing a variable of this name. This is a key of that name. So in this case, it doesn't really matter.
Is there a reason why you're using +1 and not ++?
The reason I'm not using ++, okay, there is a reason why. Because ++ updates the value of the variable upvotes to one more than upvotes. But ++ is a function, and it returns the current value. So it updates upvotes to 1 plus upvotes, but it's going to return what it was before. Okay? And so I will have the same number stored here, which isn't helpful. Which is why a lot of people avoid using ++, because it doesn't behave exactly like we expect. When we do upvotes +1, that's going to actually give us what we would hope for, 1 more than upvotes. What we could have done, though, we could do on line 52 upvotes ++, and then down here just do upvotes. All right. Let's see if this works. We're all set now. So let's go back to the browser and reload our app. Okay, so here's my top comment here, and when I click the upvote button, it starts to increment. We're just allowing our users to upvote as many times as they want. Probably not how this form really would work, but
You don't have to render anything, right?
we are re-rendering. And why is that? Why are we re-rendering?
Because every time somebody changes, you already said.
Exactly. We've already set up a event listener so that anytime the database updates, anytime the value of the database updates, we're going to automatically update our model and re-render. So here in auth state changed, when we know the user's logged in, we set up this event listener that says anytime the value of the database at the messages ref updates, run this process message function. And so anytime we update, delete, add new things, it's always going to run that function. So we're rendering every time, yes.
Are they both asynchronous?
So
So like if I were to do an atomic transaction, or even this push transaction, and the database listener, are they both asynchronous functions to the server? So let's say, because an atomic transaction, it basically keeps trying until it actually, it's basically just a check. So I would be re-rendering, even though I may not have actually added my own data.
No, it's not going to re-render until that transaction goes through. Yes, but if other people are doing it, yes, it'll re-render in the
So I
meantime.
could be re-rendering and not actually adding, but it will eventually happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. This is the power of JavaScript.
So, like, when you're updating uploads, why would you have to return? Like, do you have to like?
I don't.
Yes. I thought you would have to return like this. Since you're adding.
Hey, can you be quiet down for a second? I'm trying to get your question.
Since you're adding want to outputs
Uh-huh.
in a function.
Yeah.
Don't you have to return it?
So no, we don't, because what's happening when we call that update function is sending some sort of AJAX request to the server, which is updating the database, and that updated database is coming back and triggering our value event listener. Okay, so we already set up that value event listener, and thus, all of the rest is handled for us. We don't have to return anything. All we have to do is update the database. The value event listener that we set up right here is going to take care of the rest.
So we're updating the database, but not updating the model.
We're doing both, right? First, when we call .update, that is updating the database, wherever that was, right here. When we call .update, that is updating the database. That then goes to the database, updates, and eventually will trigger this value event, which will in turn call process messages, right? And then process messages then updates the model and then re-renders. So we are updating the model, but we're doing so through the database, right? We're going through the database, updating that so that everybody else can see the changes, and then coming back and updating our own model.
So first you update the database, and the snapshot is just a reference to the database. So it's like not to what your job to.
Correct. The snapshot is a snapshot from the database. Exactly.
Is that a parameter that's given to us from Firebase or something?
From Firebase.
So this is their parameter?
Yes.
Okay.
This comes from their Firebase only when you use the ref messages or the ref key.on from event listener. Exactly.
So that's why I missed it.
Cool. I feel like a lot of people are getting it.
This is so amazing.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do the last thing here, the D, the delete. And this is almost exactly like update, except for a little bit easier. So we're just gonna find that reference to the thing, find the child that we care about, and then instead of calling .update and passing an object, we're gonna just call .remove. Okay? So actually, I'm gonna let you go ahead and try this one on your own. It's very much like the update, except for instead of calling .update, we're gonna call .remove. Okay, so go ahead and do that. We want it to be when the user clicks the X button, the user clicks the X button, we want the message to be deleted. For anybody who has not quite kept up with everything I've done up here, I'll go ahead and post the code I have so far in Slack, so you can just get on the same page. And yeah, I'll just put it in general. We're deleting the entire message.
Show the posted part, the actual.
This?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is it. Is that what you're asking?
Can you post it inside? Is that possible?
Oh, this. Oh, sure, yeah.
this is a template.
Okay.
This is the, sorry.
Yeah.
So this is the container. Opening shared one. But where in the template is it saying whose buttons should be?
So then they should be inside the chat.
Yeah.
Nowhere. The template could be placed anywhere. It could be the place where how we know it's getting there is when we render it, we're putting it in. So we have to look in the render function.
Oh, so here somewhere in the render function. So render chat, render form. Chat, oh, there we go. So it's chat template called chat block. Okay.
So it's creating here, it's creating an HTML string. Calls that function. Now the next line, it's placing that HTML string in the chat object. So that's the only way to put it in there.
So we can put whatever we want, so long as we input this.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we could put it, we could put the same template in 4 different things.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
No, makes no sense.
Cool. Yeah, it's so cool. Okay. If you've already zoomed through that, there are a couple bonus things about Firebase in the GitHub repository if you want to take a peek at them.
Add transactions.
I didn't put transactions in there.
It's so cool that they've written that though, because that's like if it could actually expand to handle like shit like Reddit.
Oh, totally good. Totally good.
Oh, well, I'm not sure it can handle Reddit's traffic.
Oh, yeah.
Part of it.
Google's running it.
Okay.
Believe me, this thing could elastically scale up to millions of
Really wanted
users. Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Well, isn't that what we all?
My company handles more traffic than Reddit does. We handle about 4 billion hits a day.
4 billion?
This is
Yeah,
workflow
with a B.
or add this?
Add this
Add
specifically.
this?
Yeah.
What the?
Comes out to about 100,000 or so events per second.
That's a lot of people pressing add this.
Yeah, it was not just people pressing it. It's every time they even load a page that has our tools on it, we get data. So, all right. Well, they don't. We do. We did it long before they ever came into the picture.
You posted on Google too.
No, we have our own servers.
Oh, even more impressive.
Yeah,
That takes a lot of infrastructure to handle 4 billion.
it does. We're pretty good at it.
You guys are just awesome.
All right, so let's start building this out real quick. And we're going to follow the same pattern as we did for the upvote. The only real difference is, well, 2 things. One, instead of updating, we're deleting something. We're using that dot remove. And the other difference is the button, instead of having this upvote class, is the button that has the delete class. Okay, so if we go back to the JavaScript, I could just basically copy the line before and paste it there. The only thing I need to change is instead of upvote, I need the button that has the delete class is the one I care about. And instead of running a function called handle upvote, I'm going to very creatively call this handle delete. Okay, we then have to define that function. Handle delete. Ooh. Okay, well, what do we want to do here? Well, we know that the first part of this is going to be exactly the same as the upvote. We need to get that message ID, out of the HTML. So we can just use the same first line, using the button that was pressed, finding its parent, and getting the attribute data ID off of it. So if we look at our HTML, the upvote button and the delete button both have the same parent div, right? They have the same parent div that has this data ID attribute. So we could use this same method to get the message's ID. Well, now that we have that, that's everything we need in order to remove it, right? So we can, just on the next line here, call firebase.database.ref messages, and then .child. We want to find the child at message ID. And then finally, instead of update, we're just going to call remove. And the remove function doesn't need any arguments. We're just calling it to get rid of the thing that's sitting there in our database. When we do that, the database will change. The value of the database will change. That will trigger a value event. We're listening to that value event. We set up that event listener earlier in the auth state change. So we're listening for this value changed event, and when that happens, we're once again going to process messages and re-render. Right? So the rest is taken care of for us. We only have to set up the read that one time when we log in. So let's see if that works. I'm going to refresh. I've got these messages here. I'm just going to start deleting them. And pretty soon, all my messages are gone. So now I can add a new one. Hello world, take 2. There we go. Yeah.
Did you put upvotes and delete in the model? Is it very since it's already the it's already in handlebars, like
so remember, it is going into our model. The upvotes and all of those things are going into our model. We're just not writing them up here explicitly. We're getting them from the database. So when we get the value from the database, down here in process messages, we're taking that object that has message objects that have a value, text, an author, and an upvotes. And we're taking those objects that come from the database and we're storing them in the model. Okay. So we have this model. It has a .messages, a messages key, and we're taking the messages from the database and storing them in the model. And then we're re-rendering it and showing them, displaying them. So we do have that data in our model. We just don't have to type it in manually because it's coming from the database.
yeah, you put it as undefined.
That's, yeah, because I don't want to put in fake data in there. I want to only show real data now. Yeah.
Can you like put a database into Firebase and then call it?
So can you like pre-populate
Yeah.
a database with data?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one way you could do it, just go in that data explorer, right, and put in all the data that way. That would probably be painful. I'm sure there's an import where you could just take like a JSON file and put it right into the database. I'm sure you can.
There is, because I've done it with like 50,000 records.
There you go.
But does it assign each one a unique key?
No, not.
You see, that's
I define the model, yeah. Sorry.
It doesn't automatically give them keys. No, if you're going to import.
but then if you want to do something with it, you want to parse it, do something with it. How does?
Yeah.
How does,
I mean, you just interact with it like you would any other object. We just use these keys as sort of conveniences to find specific things.
so there would be already like a unique ID for each one of those records.
Yes, hopefully in the model there's a way to find them.
I happen to be doing it by postal code,
All right.
which has other identifiers that allow you to search.
Cool. Any more questions before we move on? I do want to talk about one more thing before we go, just the introduction to next class. So, but if there are more questions, I want to make sure this is clear. Okay. So, by the way, there's no real homework, but if you're having fun with this and excited about this, feel free to try to add like a downvote button to this. And maybe, maybe some other features to kind of make this a little more sophisticated and play with Firebase. But also I want you to kind of take this knowledge and start working on your final project too. So now that we have Firebase, hopefully you have all the pieces.
Is it possible to like with the user identifier, so an email?
Yeah, we could. Off the top of my head, I don't know exactly how we do it, but we totally could do that. Absolutely. Okay. All right, so let's talk about one more thing. I just want to do basically a little bit of an introduction to what we're going to be talking about next class. Again, if you want to keep working on this over the weekend, just add a downvote button as a little more practice. Today is Thursday, right? Yeah. Oh, the other thing we're going to do is deploy this. Actually, let's do this instead, and we'll move to the new stuff on Tuesday. It'll be a better sort of breakup of the course. So let's take this and actually deploy this application onto the internet. I think that's a more exciting thing to do. So, no, we haven't done it. So right now we're loading it right from, we're right-clicking and opening in the browser. When we deploy it, we can get a URL that we could send to our friends, and they could come see our application. So we're actually deploying this into production, onto the internet. Right? So we haven't done that yet. Right now, it's just sitting on our computer. We're the only ones that can see it. So what we're going to do is deploy it, and what Firebase will do is give us a unique website address, URL, that we can use for our application. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is install the Firebase command line tools. Okay, so they have a package of command line tools that we can use to do things like deployment, etc. And the way that we do this is by using npm, the node package manager, to install the Firebase tools. So we're going to run npm install-g Firebase tools. And so I will. No,
G is global.
Yeah, G means global, so it doesn't matter where you do it, but let's go ahead, we'll do this together. I am going to change directory into the application directory. So here it's .jschat. Okay. So if you're in the starter code directory, which is where we left off, cd into JSChat. So we're in our application directory. Okay? I just pasted the command to install the Firebase tools into Slack, but it's npm install -g Firebase tools. Now if this fails, well, just try it. But if it fails, then you might have to type in sudo before npm install. Hopefully not, but you might. Warnings are fine.
That should be a meme.
Yeah, I mean, if you got an error, does the error say permission denied?
Yeah. So it installed this thing called Ansible, which does describe like if it helps you create like a virtual environment. SQL. So like your container. Because it has to be every time I run it, oh, the version of SQL you use is no longer supported by it's not that we're making. We use
Good. Such a tool. Sorry.
There goes.
Forgive me.
I'll introduce you to my parents, and you will think of yourself as.
Okay, so now that we've got those installed, the first thing you're going to have to do is type in Firebase. So now we have this Firebase command we can use. We're going to type in Firebase, I believe it's log in. So type in Firebase log in. And that's actually going to open your browser and make you log into Google, or it should. I'm already logged in, so it's not going to do it for me.
It sounds like allow Firebase to collect anonymous.
Yeah. Yeah, you can say whatever you want. Say yes or no.
What is your recommendation?
I don't care. I mean, it's anonymous data. It helps them improve their application. So I say yes. I mean, I say yes. It's completely up to you.
Always tell Google. Always tell them what you're doing.
Yeah, so you got it there. So,
Invite Google
no,
into your
or,
work. Invite them to spot. I do.
So I don't I just find it gross like that.
yeah.
I just so they say that.
All these things.
35. They sent me
And
there.
then now you can get back to your terminal. So once you open Google and you hit allow, then you can come back to the terminal and it should say logged in. Supposed to be Windows. So you guys have to Google Firebase login. Get that from the Firebase tools. We're looking at, you know, they're hard. They're very simple.
So it's like this. Believe in child. It's very
Worse than the piece that we're. It's totally your fault.
Yeah.
Let's turn on filter. You know, let's turn on the filter.
Okay, so if you're on Windows, that Firebase login is not going to work. I didn't realize that ahead of time, but we will figure that out after we finish this. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to initialize a new Firebase application in this directory. So we're going to type in Firebase init. We're going to do a bunch of cool stuff, Firebase logo. And it's saying, okay, what things do you want? Do you want a database? Do you want hosting? They are both checked by default. We do want them, so I'm just going to hit enter.
How do you toggle them off?
It says like press spacebar or something. I don't remember, but it says how. But we want them both, so leave them on. Okay, what Firebase project do you want to associate as a default? You want to, yeah, just press enter. What Firebase project do you want to associate? Find your JS chat and hit enter. So hit the down arrow to get to JS chat and then hit enter. Okay, it says what files should we use for database rules? Doesn't really matter, so just hit enter.
Those are like the default, right?
Yeah, this one matters. So what do you want to use as your public directory? It's saying a directory called public. We don't want that. We actually want the current directory. So we're going to say /. So we want the current directory. So we're going to say /. Saying configure as a single page app. Rewrite all URLs to index.html. We're going to just say yes. Sure, do that. Y. Yeah, Y for yes. And then enter. And it says file index.html already exists, overwrite, and we want to say definitely don't do that, no. So type in, and then hit enter. Okay, we can do two things now. The first thing we can do, and sorry we're bumping right up against the end, but first thing we could do is say Firebase serve. Okay, so if we type in Firebase serve and hit enter, it will have a local server where we can play with our application. It says, okay, you can visit your application at localhost port 5000. So I can just copy this and put it in here, and there's our application. Okay, so that's running locally on my computer. And you can see it'll show like the request log of people that are requesting application and stuff. Okay, I'm going to stop that. Control C on Mac. Control C on both. Right? Now, the next thing I can do, and this is where the magic really happens, I can type in Firebase deploy. Okay? And this is not going to run it on my computer. It's going to run it out on a Firebase server on the internet. So this is like creating a production application. So now I can hit enter. It's going to take a little while. And now it's saying, all right, here is your application. So I can copy this URL, https://jschat1.firebaseapp.com. I can copy that and put that in the browser. And now I've got a hosted version of my application. Okay, so for fun, I'm going to post the URL to my hosted version in Slack. And everybody can come log into my application, and you can leave a comment about whatever you want. Yeah, just put it in general. So I'm going to log in. Remember, you're going to have to register for mine because you never used my application before, so you're going to have to register. And you'll see just a bunch of comments are already showing up just magically.
I shouldn't use my real email address.
Why? Love you too.
Someone's upvoting it. Oh my god, who is that?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody, upvote it. All right, this is awesome. So sorry, Windows people. I'll work with you here in a second. We'll try to get it working. Oh, you're good? Excellent. Thank you so much. If maybe post. Okay, the steps after are pretty simple. They're in the video, and I'll come help you with them after this. But if you would, please fill out the exit ticket before you leave. Again, sorry against bumping up. It's almost 9:30, but please do fill that out. It's helpful for us. This is pretty fantastic. Oh no, sorry, Paul.
What's up?
Exit ticket.
Do it. In my defense, it's the same thing as.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Adam's a shitty editor, so you have more reference for Adam, which you can install a separate.
Wait. Today is 6. Wait, what is today's class? Is it? I'll fix it. I don't know what it is.
No.
So a look ahead on Tuesday, we're going to look at object-oriented programming in JavaScript. So we're going to look at basically some advanced JavaScript language things. You don't necessarily need them for your final project, but it's good to know that they exist.
Everything. I liked everything about it. Nothing driven better. This was awesome. Jacob, this is exactly what I need for my project.
Excellent.
This is amazing. Firebase is literally the greatest gift to the world.
It's pretty awesome.
Can they win a Nobel Prize for this? Is there like a Nobel Prize in CS?
No, but hopefully they'll just make a lot of money and stick around for a while.
I agree with that. Here.
Yeah.
It's not based on this. Okay. So we're doing a SharePoint site.
So you can have a local server and then deploy it. It's all texting. Oh my
But
God.
essentially, so this
That's
is
some
what
hot shit right there.
what I started with, which is just getting the right data and then rendering the right.
You don't even know.
I need to make her name. So.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that.
Okay, so I'm running
She's not with
get
you.
user ID with manager data, which is, and this is all just from like Stack Overflow.
Okay.
I've never dealt with SharePoint before.
Okay, here's your idea. Yeah, and so then it's going to do this, change the context.
There's also,
Get the right user.
if you want
That's how
like,
to succeed. And this is failed here. So it definitely calls this. And it gets the right user ID. And then I'm running a node to get other info based on the ID. And I'm getting the right thing here. But I need this to go back to here.
Right.
So if this is on the, I don't wanna like set a global variable. But for a success function, can I like return something and then just that, just what's returned from the success function? Is that for, okay, so do I have to set a variable?
Not necessarily global, but you do have to set a variable in a scope that they both have access to.
Okay, so, yeah.
Or you could call a function that takes that value and then uses it to write a new value. So you could write a new function that takes just the name and then takes that name and renders that. So then you could call that function in here. So right here where you have the name, the next time you could call a function and pass it that name.
Oh, I guess I could do a function that just depends, because it's the last thing that, it's like the last line.
Yeah.
So I can just not do this, and I can just do,
Yeah. It's okay. No problem.
it wasn't working when I do.
Okay, so this is
So what it does is it loads in, so that's crazy.
I guess maybe the did dash this.
Very.
I'll do some research with this.
Now that they're doing shop stuff.
Oh,
There's some convention.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Okay, so if you go back to the thing, it should now be logged in. The issue is, no, I don't think that it's not Firebase. Hold on.
So I guess I would.
So the next step is supposed to be is to this application. So when you run a box, and then after that, however, I think this shell doesn't allow the server to be able to interact with it and say yes, no. So everything's going to think that's what I need to do with the service. I believe so, yeah. I need to verify. Yeah. Training. Oh, this is working. It is so try, first of all, do it, let's see what's in there. Let's see if I can do it. Let's try Firebase in there. Okay, now it is here again. It's asking you, do you want to do it just as a look for it? I have this. So anyway, is this one. Now just keep it here now. Grab the arrows and all that. Is it anything that doesn't? Well, it gave me two options. Yeah, but they default both. So with the asterisk in there, you got an S. But if you can't, here down. This is here, you air down, don't you air down. I wonder if there's a function there. Which one? Alright, let's see that. Once I figure it out, so it's a decision in general, hopefully it's like a stack overflow or something.